Hello, my name is Kingsley Ahanano, your safety disciple, and you're welcome to School Safety Profitability Series, where I'll be talking about how you can use elements of health and safety to increase your school's profit. So stick with me as we dive into today's topic. So our topic for today is going to be emergency response plan. So we are going to be talking about how we can use emergency response plan to improve our school's profit. So hang on with me as I take you through the steps and processes of implementing emergency response plan. So one of the first things we need to understand is what an emergency response plan is. So emergency response plans are a set of procedures, written procedures that deals with emergency. So what is an emergency in this sense? Emergency is any happenings that is not planned. Okay, so it includes the weather, geological, biological, or human-made events that poses risk to life, property, or the environment. Okay, and some of these emergencies that are peculiar to schools and of course our communities as well are fire, building collapse, kidnapping, riots, flooding, earthquake, oil spill, severe injury to students or staff. So that is what an emergency response plan is, and we are going to be seeing how we can implement or start emergency response plan in our next slide. So before we know how to start and implement an emergency response plan, we need to understand what are the goals. So the goals of an emergency response plan is to, one, protect this health and safety of school occupants, including visitors. Okay, so you put in measures to ensure that your visitors and your students and including your staff are what's protected. Okay, and it also to protect schools' asset and finance. So also to protect the school ability to operate, because in an emergency situation it can render your school useless if you do not have measures to reduce such incidents. Okay, it can also it's also to establish clear line of authority, coordination applicable to emergency response. We all know that during an emergency people react to a whole lot of things and people are not coordinated. But when you have an emergency response plan and everybody knows his or her own responsibility, it is easier for you or your school to respond promptly and perfectly, or I shouldn't use the word perfectly now, but in a good manner to address such emergency situation. So it also helps to centralize, okay, and define procedures to be implemented in response to emergency. So it's almost the same with what I said previously. It helps you to know who and who is to do what and do what in the case of emergency. And it also helps to ensure a timely recovery, because in a case where you do not have emergency response plan in place and procedure, if there's an emergency, the effect is going to be higher, or the severity or the impact on your business, on your school, is going to be higher than when you have an emergency response plan. So these are the goals of emergency response plan. So there are 8 steps you need to do or you need to take to create an emergency response plan in your school. So one of them is assemble your planning team, identify risk, threats, and vulnerability of your school, identify contact information of local emergency personnel and services, assess your school's resources, develop your school emergency response team, and assign responsibility, create a written policy and procedure, okay, written policy and communication plan, train and educate, practice and review. So we are going to dive into these steps one after the other so that I can briefly explain how you can go about it. So hang in there with me and let's continue this. So the first step is you need to assemble your planning team. Okay, so just like everything we do in life, we need to plan. And when it involves 1 or 2 persons, we need to form a team. A school is an entity, a school is a business. So you form a team, establish authority. Establish authority simply means you give out responsibility. Who is to identify risk? Who is to contact emergency services? who is to do this, who is to do that. Okay, so you issue a mission statement. So when you have your planning team, what does the planning team want to achieve? What mission are you on in the planning team? So that is the mission statement. Okay, so you establish a schedule and a budget. Yes, you have to have a budget because some of the steps you're going to take will require funding, will require money. Okay, so definitely you need to establish a budget and also a schedule like a target that within 2-3 months we should have a working emergency response plan. So that is the first step. So let's check the second step. Number 2, the second step, identify risk, threats and hazards of your school. Okay, so you need to identify some of those things or those events that can lead to emergency situation. You list potential emergencies. You estimate the likelihood of each emergencies by carrying out what is called risk assessment. Of course, we are going to talk about that in subsequent school safety profitability series. Okay, you assess the potential human impact. Okay, assess the potential property impact because you're also talking about humans and also lives and properties as well. Okay, so you need to assess the potential business impact. Yes, it is very important. What impacts will each emergencies that you have identified will have on your business? You need to look into that. Okay, you need to determine planning and resource priority. Planning and resource priority comes in when you must have identified the potential emergencies and also estimated the impact. So when you have an emergency that have a high rating in its impact, you need to dedicate your resources. You need to prioritize your resources to such emergencies, knowing that it is going to have a larger impact on your business than other emergencies. So that's what it means by determining planning and resource priority. So let's move on to the third step. So the third step is to identify contact information of local emergency personnel and services. So it is very important you identify services outside your school premises that are important in managing emergency situations. So some of these services are ambulance services, local and state police for violent situations, fire department for fire emergencies, hospitals for medical emergencies, local government agencies, yes, local government that governs activities within where your school is located is very important. Paramedics, these are people that arrive to emergency situation location first and give out treatment or preserve life before being taken to a medical facility. So it is very important you identify who is going to give you these services. And also utility companies should, in case you have like emergency situation like fire that needs you to take out the power source from the utility, these people would help you put a call through to them. And also water. Yes, water, you have emergency situation that has to do with water, you can call. Gas as well. So it depends on what facilities you have in your school that will determine the kind of utility companies you might have their emergency contact. Okay, so we'll move on to the fourth step. So the fourth step is assess your school's resources. What this simply means is assess what you presently have on ground in your school. So you help you determine what else you need. Okay, because you are still at the planning phase. Okay, so resources like ambulance services, auxiliary communication equipment, emergency protective clothing, employees, fire alarm and smoke detectors, medical supplies, rescue equipment, third-party service providers, yes, like a security company, trained personnel, and fire extinguishers. So this is like a list, but in your school you might have more than what is being stated here. So but you need to identify them first before you know what else you need to get your emergency response system or plan in place. So this is the fourth step. We'll go on to the fifth step. Remember, we have 8 steps to cover. Okay, so let's continue. So the fifth step is to create emergency response team. The first step is basically to create a team, a planning team. But at this point, you need to create the emergency response team. And the emergency response team are people who prepare for and respond to emergency incident, okay? And their primary goal or their main aim is to ensure they restore or maintain operations and minimize losses in an emergency situation. Okay, some of the teams are going to include emergency coordinators, security personnel, first aiders, fire floor wardens, communication personnel, firefighters. So in the next step, we are going to see how to assign responsibilities. We are going to see who and who should do what and what. Okay, so it's going to be a cumbersome or so the sixth step is to create a written policy and communication plan. So that is why it is called emergency response plan. So you need to write them down, okay? All the things you've done, all the steps you've taken, what you've identified, the external resources you've identified, your internal resources you've identified, you need to write them down, okay? So your plan should include means of reporting emergencies, evacuation procedures and escape route, because you need to identify your escape routes within your school, okay? So procedures on how to account for students, staff after evacuation is complete. So in the case of emergency, when people or students or visitors are evacuated to a safe point, who accounts for them? You pen it down, you write them down. How will you account for them? You write them down. Also, rescue and medical duties for employees, you need to also put that down, write them down, okay? Names or job title of persons who can be contacted in case of emergency. So those external resource personnel like your fire department, the police, the local authority that you've identified, you need to write them down, okay? Because anything that is not written didn't happen. And for others to know, for easier communication, you need to write it down so that, for example, when you have a new management in place, where there's a change of management, it is easier for the new management coming in to have something to work with and know the system you have in place already. Okay, so that is why it is called emergency response plan. At this point is where you need to write them down, and it is very, very important. So let's move on to the seventh step. So the 7 steps is you need to train, educate, and communicate. So all you've been doing from step 1 to 6, if you do not train, if you do not educate, if you do not communicate, then it won't be successful. Your emergency response plan won't work. Okay, so you need to educate your workers, students on the type of emergencies in your school and within your school or within your school environment, and the proper action or the actions that you will put in place for them to follow. Because if you don't tell them, if you don't educate them, they won't know. And when they don't know, because in emergency situation, people act based on what they already know. Okay, so in the case of emergency, it's not when you start telling them this is how you evacuate. It is before emergency. Okay, so that's why education or educating them prior to the emergency or before the emergency is very, very important for the success of your emergency response plan. You need to also train your emergency response team. Okay, so identify people that require some necessary skills like your first aiders, your firefighters, your floor wardens, your emergency coordinators. These people require skills that are not obtainable or easily obtainable. They need to go for special training and be certified. Okay, so you need to train those persons. And finally, you need to communicate. Yes, communicate the plan to your parents, to students, to visitors, and necessary stakeholders. Necessary stakeholders might be the external resources like the ambulance team, like the local police that you've identified, so that they know what you have on ground and know what to do in the case of your own emergency situation. Okay, so this 7 step is actually also important. So let's go to the final and last step, which is the 8th step. So the final step is to practice and review. you need to practice and review. So what are you practicing and reviewing? You need to practice and review your emergency response plan, the way you have written it down. Okay, so how do you practice and review? Conduct emergency response drill. Emergency response drill is practice. The word drill simply means practice. Okay, so you have to practice the emergency procedures that you have written down to ensure that everybody is aware, and not just aware, everybody knows what to do, their roles and responsibility. Also, you need to facilitate exercises that test your team's knowledge. Which team are we talking about here? Your emergency response team. Your emergency response team members, like your emergency coordinator, your firefighters, your floor warden, you need to know that they know their roles and responsibility by facilitating different exercises. Okay, so you need to also conduct drills once every month. It is recommended. Okay, why is it recommended that you conduct a drill once every month? It's because of the activities involved in a school setting. In a school setting, we have students, we have teachers, we have other staff members that can range from 100 to 200 to thousands. Okay, so where you have lots of persons, it is recommended that you conduct the drill frequently, and for a school setting, conduct once every month, so that everybody would be aware, everybody would know what to do in emergency situation. So any lesson you learn from the drill that you conduct, because you have to generate a report from your drill, the practice you practice, what are your short forms, what are your shortcomings, what are the things you did well, what are the things you did not do well, was your emergency response time up to the standard that is being required. So any lesson you learn, the people actually understand your emergency response drill procedure, you have to learn a lesson from it, review it, and also finally evaluate and modify the plan from the lessons you've learned. So this is the final step in conducting emergency response plan. Okay, so to answer your question and the aim of the school safety profitability series, where I teach you and I show you how to use elements of health and safety system to improve your school profit. How can an emergency response plan increase your school profit? So we'll see that in the next slide. So before I answer that question, let's quickly look at this survey done in USA by an NGO that is trying to understand some of the reasons or some of the criteria that parents do look at before they pick schools for their wards, for their children. So as you can see on the screen, I have 76% going for good teachers. So 76% of the people that took part in the survey, parents that took part in the survey, actually said they look out for good teachers before they pick a school for their student. The next one is academic success. Okay, the academic success of the school, which was 68%. Okay, so that is the next thing. Then the third one, which is of interest here, is school safety. So every parent always look out for schools that are safe before they enroll their kids, which is going to take me to the next slide, where I will answer your questions on how emergency response plan can improve your school's profit. So there are 5 ways the emergency response plan can increase your school's profit. 1, parents and guardians will have increased confidence in your school system, because imagine a parent comes to your school and you present your emergency response plan, showing the parents what you want to do in case of emergency. The parents' confidence that their child and their ward is in a safe environment for learning is going to increase. Also, parents will refer your school to their friends and family. So one of the best ways of marketing, or one of the best form of marketing, is word of mouth. And how do you get this word of mouth? When you give your present customers, who are your parents, good services. And having an emergency response plan is part of good business services, okay? Because when you have those plans in place, they take that message, they take that information to their parents and families, and communicate it. That way your school is spreading and you are getting more people to come and pick interest and bring their words to your school, which turns into more profit. Okay, so your immediate community will also have good reviews of your school when visitors or strangers make inquiries. Let me sound this, that most parents do conduct investigation before they bring their words to your school, and some of those investigation involves talking to neighbors about the history of your school. So if you have an emergency response plan, and when an emergency occurs, you initiate your plan, and the community gets to see that you're putting in efforts to ensure that everybody that comes to your school is safe, definitely they will have good reviews for your school, which leads to more persons and more word of mouth as well. Word of mouth advertising, which is going to increase your the number of pupils that come to your school and also increase your profit. Okay, so it will also help to retain your staff. Okay, it will help to retain your staff. So when a staff or a teacher knows that when an emergency occurs, my school or my workplace has this plan in place to take care of me, it helps retain them. Okay, so it also boosts morale, because working in a safe environment boosts the morale of your staff and also increase their productivity, which will have effect on the pupils. So that, and in the long run, if their productivity is low and it does not have an effect on the children, definitely the parents will have to withdraw their children from your school. And also students are comfortable and feel safe to learn, because if your environment is not safe, if you do not have an emergency response plan in place, they would always know and go and tell their parents that my school, they don't take care of us, they don't do this, they don't do that. Imagine one of my friend got hurt today and my school couldn't administer first aid. And you know, when such messages get to parents, they will say, what will now happen when it has to do with my own child? Okay, and as such you tend to lose students, because parents will start withdrawing their children from your school, that your school is not safe for them. So these are the ways that emergency response plan can actually increase your school's profit. So finally, to round this up, in summary, in emergency situations, the action you take within few minutes will largely dictate the severity of consequences to follow. So when you take immediate action, which will be based on the fact that you know what you want to do before the emergency, it reduces the severity. Okay, so unexpected situation can happen at any time, so you have to be prepared. And how can you be prepared? By having your emergency response plan in place, okay, to minimize the damage and loss. Okay, so planning for interruptions, emergencies, disaster is a crucial aspect of running a business. Like I tell most school owners, owning a school is also like running a business. A school is a business. They are out to make profit and also make impact. Okay, so you have to take it as a business and put those emergency response in place. So an emergency response plan is designed to help school address various emergency situations that will occur within their organization. So just like we've seen from the beginning, it is meant to identify and ensure that you have systems in place and procedures to ensure that the emergency situation do not become severe. So emergency response plan is a business enabler. Okay, so that brings us to the end of our session on emergency response plan. Thank you for watching. Thank you for following. I hope you've learned one or two things. If so, kindly share this video with your connections, with your family, with your friends, and also do not forget to subscribe. Click the subscribe button. More contents on health, safety, and environment coming. I am Kingsley Ahanono. I am committed to ensuring schools improve their brand and make profits using health and safety system. Thank you very much. See you next time.